So from the last video, I'm keeping with the idea of 22 divided by 7, or the Fool, the 22nd card of the Major Arcana, divided by a Chariot, which gives us pi, and also the squared circle. Plato understood this in a more philosophical sense in his book Phaedrus, when he writes that the madness is eternal, the madness which is the Fool, that the madness is eternal and a gift from the gods, whereas sanity, the Chariot, is man-made, and that since civilized people can't live by inspiration alone, the rational mind should be composed, like the rational city, after the pattern set in the heavens. It's basically a philosophical way of squaring the circle. So looking at the Major Arcana through the lens of the rational mind, the charioteer, through the lens of that 7, we see that the Major Arcana divides into 3 equal parts, with the Fool basically as a trump card on top. So if you take away the Fool as the background, the Fool is where all possibilities exist within the 0. You have 21 cards remaining, and that with that 7 you could divide it into 3 equal parts. So from there we see that Chariot has different octaves, being temperance and the world, which reminds me of the discussion held by Socrates and Glaucus, I think was his name, in the book The Republic, who says that it's through temperance that the masses, the people, the Chariot, that the masses, the people, and the enlightened elite, which are the philosophers, are held together. The Chariot is the people because after the fall, when we see the chronology of the cards in a linear way, after the fall is where we are now, in a civilized realm, if you will. That's us, the people. And the world is the higher, has a much higher octave in a way. It's more what Plato called, or what Socrates called, the enlightened philosophers. So he says that it's through temperance that the people and the elite and the philosophers are held together. So here we see this logical, linear way of looking at archetypes that meld together in a cohesive way. And you could do this throughout. This whole line here. This is looking at the Major Arcana through the lens of 7. So through the lens basically of a rational mind, you could come up with different ways of looking at different subjects. Another way of saying basically the same thing, he says that it's through temperance. It's through the temperance as a medium through which courage and wisdom are harmonized. So courage, again, being the Chariot, and wisdom being the world. You can make other conclusions that are similar to these going down the line here. Like it's through a death of some kind, a rebirth, let's say, that the fall of man is finally concluded with a rebirth, with a lifting of man that we see here in the Judgment card, where the couple now is reborn with an infant. Or the Hierophant, which represents communication with God. It is through a new way of seeing things with the Hangman upside down, or a sort of sacrifice of kinds that we achieve a higher power and a higher connection to God. The linear way of looking at it isn't always so obvious, because if we go to another statement that Socrates says in the Republic, he says that justice is achieved when there is a ruler, a powerful and wise ruler that rules over the lower masses. So if we look at it through this version, where the lower octave is the people with the Chariot and the higher octave is the world, well then this inverses here, because here the higher ruler, the wiser ruler, is below the public, the subconscious, the unconscious public. So the linear way of and same thing if we go back down here to the magician, then the devil would be above the magician. So it's basically through the magician represents consciousness. So we'd say with consciousness it wouldn't make sense to have the devil above consciousness, the devil as the last card, as a concluding card. So yeah, so through the grid, through this way of looking at it, through the linear progression of looking at it, you don't know which is up and which is down anymore. Like, it seems to inverse. It's hard to say which way is up and which way is down. And there's no real way of making sense of it if you just keep on repeating the same rule down the line like that. And that's because looking at it through this linear way is only halfway through the operation of understanding how the Major Arcana works. There's still a lot of people look at it this way. They divide the Major Arcana into sevens or nines or whichever way you'd like. And there's many ways to divide it, which I'll explore further in further videos that are much more advanced than this way, but this is more like just a seven or a rational way of looking at it. But anyway, dividing the grid itself, dividing the cards into a square grid, if you will, is only halfway through the operation. What we need to do is actually turn this grid into a circle again, and have the circle, basically the squared circle must be repeated again. We have to have the circle and the square communicating with each other at all times. Like Plato was saying in Phaedrus when he says that madness belongs to the gods and rational mind belongs to man. The gods are what provide inspiration, so we need both at once communicate. We can't just have the rational mind. The rational mind loses itself in too many details. So both need to be together in one, in a sort of harmony and a sort of alchemical marriage. So we need to bring the square back to the circle, but still have the square there. So a way of looking at this to understand how that works, as simply as I could put it, I guess, would be from the book The Geometry of Meaning by Arthur M. Young, where he shows us how, with an example of a swinging pendulum, a pendulum that's swinging through time, he shows that the line is shown as time, and the pendulum as a sine wave, the pendulum as a curve, as a wave through time. And from beginning to end, the beginning of the line is the beginning of the swing, and the end of the line, the end of the swing. So we have a swing of the pendulum through time, and the wave is representative of the maximums and minimums of the state of that swing. The second wave represents the rate at which the position changes, which means velocity. And the third wave shows us the acceleration of the pendulum. So all of these waves are one quarter of a cycle distant from each other. So now if we bend that line into a circle, into quarters yet again, if we bend that line and then use those same quarters, we have 90-degree segments, which brings us to the circle in a way in a zodiacal chart. When we bend the line into a circle, we put in every category into 90-degree segments, as we had before, but now within a circle. And we have position, velocity, and acceleration. And with the fourth factor being control, we have a complete chart, a complete circle, with every factor separated by 90 degrees. And then the author compares this kind of thinking to a child's learning cycle, with the spontaneous act, the reaction, the observation, and control, which could be literally overlaid over the zodiacal chart, with spontaneous being a quality that belongs to Aries, reaction being a quality that belongs to Cancer, observation to Libra, and control Capricorn. So anyway, if we come back to that major arcana grid of sevens, we have a division by thirds, where everything's divided by thirds. So in a circle of 360 degrees, we have three slices of 120 degrees, which gives us a triangle, which in astrology they call a trine. So the trine is the aspect that's always easy, or in a philosophical way, an aspect that's self-evident. So these statements that Plato is making are sort of self-evident statements because they belong in a triangle grid. When you look at it in a circle instead of a linear way, there is no up or down necessarily anymore, in that if you're just like on a sphere, if you're in Australia, you don't feel like you're upside down compared to America. That's how it works in a sphere. There's no literal up or down. So in this way, everything becomes a lot more easy to understand when you start dissociating the cards into verbal statements or philosophical understandings of how the world works.